Now, the next topic I'm going to talk about is, I'm not going to talk about all the kind of super changes and details. Hopefully everyone got their resolutions in by 30 June last year. Hopefully everyone's made their CGT elections if they needed to. But moving forward, just having a look at this concept of the total super balance. And the total super balance is if a member has the super balance in all their super funds of over $1.6 million, they then can't put non-concessional contributions into the fund after that. If they've got over $500,000, they can't do this concessional contribution catch-up. That's going to start, is effective of 1 July this year. Also, it was slated to commence on 1 July last year, was some changes to limited recourse borrowing arrangements where if you enter into a limited recourse borrowing arrangement, that the borrowing amount would be considered an asset. So effectively, the borrowing would be ignored. So, turning all the accounting principles on their heads. So I'm not sure how, that's going to be accounted for. That didn't get through for 1 July 2017, got sent back for public comment. The public comment closed in January of this year, and so we still don't know. It's slated to commence on 1 July 2018, but we still haven't heard where that's at in the Parliament yet. But I'll just briefly consider, what the implications of that might be. So looking at the first example for your total super balance, here we've got a sole member super fund, $1.3 million balance, and that member through his family trust also owns a commercial property worth $1.7 million. They're eligible under that family trust for the 15-year retirement exemption, and so they want to get that property into super, or otherwise sell the property and get the proceeds into super. So depending how you do it, so if the proceeds are distributed from the trust to the member, and then under that 1.455 million CGT cap amount that's contributed to super, you'll see that that super balance there has increased from 1.3 million to 2.745 million. So now they can't make any more non-concessional contributions, can they? And sorry, I should rewind here, is you can't make non-concessional contributions if your total super balance is over 1.6 million, but you're still allowed to make those CGT cap contributions if you're eligible for the CGT cap. The 15-year retirement exemption is the best one because you can put the capital proceeds in up to that CGT cap, not just that capital gain. But look, they didn't get as much as they could have by doing it this way. The better way that they could have done it is they're under that $1.6 million limit, put in that non-concessional contribution using that bring forward rule first, and then they can put the 1.445 in after that. So then we've got an extra $300,000 in that super environment. Does that make sense? So looking at this draft legislation on the limited recourse borrowing arrangements, so Camilla's the sole member of the bad timing self-managed super fund. Just after the legislation comes in, so 1 July this year, if it does come in, she does a limited recourse borrowing arrangement to acquire a property worth $1.6 million. Now, I don't know about you, but it looks like her super balance is still $500,000 to me. Certainly it's probably a bit less with all the fees and stamp duty and that kind of thing for entering into a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. But so now her deemed total super balance includes that loan of $1.1 million and she's over that $1.6 million amount. Leads us to the question, well, how's she going to pay off that loan? How's the super fund going to pay off that loan? Especially with APRA, hounding down on everyone about, or on all the banks, sorry, and not liking these interest-only loans. If this legislation comes in, it's pretty foreseeable that one, banks won't be that keen to lend in this space when it's pretty difficult to reduce that principal. And two, it's all getting a bit harder from an accounting perspective of, having this notional total super balance as a different asset account too. Certainly Labor's said that they're looking at abolishing limited recourse borrowing arrangements if they get into government. It looks like the coalition with touting these kind of things to, they're putting these things out there to address an perceived mischief, but it seems like the results are, they are much greater than, what the mischief is they're trying to fix. So, it might be a death by 1,000 cuts to these, limited recourse borrowing arrangements. So it might not come in. The good news is that with the current legislation, for any borrowing arrangements that are entered into before it takes effect, they're not counted towards your total super balance. So, there might be a bit of a rush on, people who are thinking about it to get that done before that legislation takes effect. That makes sense? So, I call this the Holy Grail, and as Tom referred to before, it looks like we've got a better stamp duty position than I talked about last year. And so this is the kind of one I was just saying to Terry in the break, this is the kind of one where if you find a friend or a client who's in this situation, you might get that Guernsey to their wedding or lunches for quite a while if you get a result like this for them. So in this case, Lucky Eddie has a self-managed super fund, and that's his balance is $1.6 million. So he can't make those non-concessional contributions into super anymore because he's over that 1.6 million total super balance. His family trust owns a property worth $3 million. And so that's the freehold. The freehold's worth $3 million, and that runs his business on it. And so that's eligible for that 15-year retirement exemption. So that's a really good earner for him, and he's on the top marginal tax rate outside of super. So he wants to get that property into super. But he's over the $1.6 million, so how's he going to get that in? Through that CGT cap, obviously, but instead of doing it as an REIQ contract, he's doing it as a declaration of trust. So it's declared that that freehold is no longer held on the trust of the family trust, it's held on the trust of the super fund. The super fund's still got to pay for that. So it's got that money in there, it pays that to the family trust. The family trust then makes that CGT cap contribution back in. That's increased the super balance, and Lucky's self-managed super fund still makes that final $1.4 million payment. So it's bought that entire $3 million property. Really good earner inside of that super fund. And there's no prohibition. I mean, Lucky's family trust with that extra cash could even do a limited recourse borrowing arrangement, providing it's on commercial terms, back into the super fund, to buy another asset or buy some, buy another property or whatever. But this is a situation where Lucky Eddie is probably in a situation where, one, he's approaching that $6 million net asset test, so he might not be eligible for these really generous capital gains tax small business concessions moving forward. Two, we're a bit concerned that there might be legislation to fix up this disparity, that people who are selling a small business asset who have already got $1.6 million in super can get another $1.6 million in super, so they're on a different playing field than the rest of the PAYG. So whilst they still haven't fixed up that anomaly, he's pretty keen to crystallise this transaction and get that into the super fund. And even better, usually you'd be paying $150,000 stamp duty, and doing it via a declaration of trust properly set up, we're doing that without stamp duty. And like Tom was saying before, I've seen some assessments from the Office of State Revenues for family trusts where we've changed those default beneficiaries, and under that section 118, we've got that exemption. So the idea there is, even if that family trust doesn't have a default beneficiary, first step is we change it to put Lucky Eddie in as that default beneficiary, then we do that declaration of trust and we get that over to the super fund. Normally the conversation goes, oh, it's a necessary evil, you've got to pay $150,000 stamp duty, but the tax savings, that'll get paid off over a number of years. But it's real cherry on the pie, so to speak, of being able to say this can be done without stamp duty. So if you have any friends who are in this situation, or your client book looking at that, they'll probably be pretty happy with a scenario where they can get a good earner into super without stamp duty. But they've got to have been running that business for 15 years to get eligibility for this CGT exemption. But another good time to look at these is before the budget, because that's when we always get those surprise announcements that can kill off all of these great ideas that me and Tom and the other lawyers and accountants talk about. Any questions on any of that? Yes?
Kieran, would you consider share trading being a business?
I wouldn't. I know there's a few different ATO opinions on that with your passive investment vehicles in companies and that type of thing. I think Tom's your better man to answer that question for you, so maybe after we finish. Any other questions?